Now, we also have a concern to preserve our uniqueness of identity. And when we interact with others according to an existential approach, they help us better understand who we are, develop more knowledge about who we are. And also, the other members of the group are sort of checks and balances against our beliefs of the self. If I were in individual therapy, I might convince myself that I'm living in accordance with my values and I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing. I'm taking responsibility for my life, and the things that are going wrong in my life, I had nothing to do with the problem. Well, when you have other members in the group, they're going to push back on you and say, well, you're acting like a fly on the wall, but have you considered X, Y, Z? Have you considered how you contribute to the continuation of your own problems? So it's nice that in a group setting, when we interact with others, we get to see how others see us, and they get to challenge us on whether or not we're living in accordance with our value system. Now, the significance of our existence and the meaning of our life is not fixed. It changes through our life. And as we accomplish one goal, we don't say, oh, I'm done, did everything I needed to do. No, what happens is we create a new goal, a new life task, and we start striving towards that goal or life task. So what we tend to see is that who we are is never fixed, and we can recreate ourselves through the projects that we take upon ourselves. Another important thing is that anxiety is normal. It's part of the human condition. From an existential point of view, anxiety is something that gets you to think about life. It's your natural alarm bells. It's supposed to happen. So when I ask you, well, what are you going to do after you graduate? If you had anxiety about that, that would be an existential anxiety. Now, another form of anxiety comes from death. So death thought, accessibility, or mortality salience. If I were to get people to think about the fact that they're going to die, everybody dies, that will provoke some really heavy feelings in your life. Now, there's a great book by Ernest Becker, who was he was a sociologist who wrote a book called The Denial of Death. And he talks about all the ways that because there's anxiety that comes from thinking about death, we do everything to not have to think about death. In fact, we don't even like to use the word death. If someone dies, what do we say? Oh, they passed away. They moved to the other world. We use all these different phrases not to even use the word death. Because death, even though it's a basic part of the human condition, triggers anxiety. So, but it's important to understand that we understand our mortality, because that's going to put pressure for us to do things and make meaning of our life. If someone were to ask me what my greatest fear is, it's simple. My greatest fear is to die mediocre. Now, I am not considering myself a great person. I don't see that. I feel that I'm learned and I've accomplished a few things, but I don't believe I've yet reached my potential and fulfilled all my life goals. But I'm afraid to die mediocre or a life unfulfilled. So that is my deepest fear, right? For life to be cut short and not fulfill my mission. But that's normal. That's a normal thing. And I'm 40, so now I'm thinking about it more than when I was 20. When I was 20, I never thought about death. I thought about all the fun things that I wanted to do and all the traveling. But now that I'm 40, I'm like, okay, well, I'm just about equal number of years in front of me as behind me. I'm at the midway point, according to lifespan theorists. So I better, press the gas so that I live a fulfilled life. Now, thinking about death could also provoke a sense of loneliness in people. So what's the goal of therapy? The main goal of therapy is to assist participants in accepting their freedom and to become the authors of their own life. We create our own destiny, and we are responsible for creating a good experience. It's interesting. I have family, and I have one family member in particular that, and I'll say they so that no one can deduce who I'm talking about, but they're always negative, and they're always looking for bad things to happen. And they're always saying all the things that they cannot do. And while they're doing that, they're giving up on living a happy life. They're yielding their power, because when they say, oh, this never works out or this is happening, well, then they quit trying to do something about it. And that's a shame, because they could live an enjoyable, happy life, but they choose not to. And I use the word choose because I want them to assume responsibility for their outcome. So if they're having problems with their kids, what are you doing about it? If they're having problems with their romantic partner, what role do you play in those problems? If they're not happy with, the amount of enjoyment in the world, well, what are you doing about it? Are you going on vacation? Are you exploring the world? Like, you have a lot of responsibility in choosing your life. So you could choose to be unhappy, or you could choose not to. Now, I wouldn't say this to them because I know that they wouldn't receive it, but you're going to see that. We have free choice. And with that free choice, we are the authors of our own life, and we are responsible for that. Now, another goal is I-thou relationships versus I-it relationships. A goal is to connect with a person on person to person versus third person, which is impersonal. In couples therapy, sometimes there'll be a member of the couple who complains about their partner, and they have to point out all the problems with their partner. I usually say, well, have you looked at them and told them what you want, right? Oftentimes it's, he never does this, she never does that. Well, that's a third person point of view. An I-thou encounter is more equal, and it's more connected to the person. So an expression that I encourage in therapy is, I feel blank when you blank because blank. I feel sad when you scream because it reminds me of my childhood, let's say. So now when you do that, it's an I-thou encounter. You're not saying it's the reality, you're just saying how you feel. You're connecting with it on a direct way. Now, in terms of existential therapy, once again, there's a reaction against viewing the system as well-defined, integrated techniques. Also a little bit hodgepodge. Now, person-centered therapy or client-centered therapy comes from Carl Rogers. And according to Carl Rogers, there are 3 cornerstones of meaningful therapy: empathy, unconditional positive regard,
I'm a therapist who goes to therapy, and some people think that's strange. The thing is, though, therapists are human beings just like you. If you've been thinking about or know that you need to go to therapy, listen, it's not abnormal, weak, or weird to feel overwhelmed, angry, depressed, confused when life is chaotic, or you're grieving, or you just started a new job, or you cannot stop arguing with your partner. We therapists don't just listen. We have years of education and experience on how to navigate through life, and we know what it's like to not be able to do that on your own. Most people imagine therapy as this tedious, time-consuming task that's supposed to get in the way of everything else we need to get done in our lives. But therapy doesn't need to be like that. Imagine therapy like this. Everything is online, and your therapy takes place on a virtual platform, either on your phone or on your laptop. You schedule all of your appointments online, and if you aren't vibing with the first therapist that you're matched with, then you switch to a new one easily. The best part is this isn't something that you need to imagine. BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform. Remember, therapists go to therapy. Why? Because it works, and you don't have to do this on your own. Get started today.
And we're back. The team is looking down the barrel of a 4:55 meeting.
They're gassed, Jill. Can they turn it around and make this meeting an email?
It's going to be a tough shot. But whoa there, they're getting an assist from Grammarly. Jones is taking the ball and running with it. She's asking Grammarly to write the first draft of an email.
What a play. Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you make your point. And it's super private, Jill. They've got a strong defense.
And watch her finesses, Bill. She's adjusting the tone beautifully.
Take a look at that, Jill. It really sounds like her. No substitutions.
She's got a clear shot, and it's good.
They're giving it the full court press now. Ellis, the Cincinnati kid, is using Grammarly to summarize an important doc, and bam, that's a three-pointer. Ellis, he's been seeking redemption ever since he ended that conference call by saying, "I love you."
100%. Look at that passing game, Bill. Messages are flying, and the precision is just incredible. When everyone uses Grammarly, everything just makes sense.
It's 4:50. Meeting is still on the clock. Can they beat the buzzer? Bazinga!
It's a slam dunk. The meeting's canceled. They'll go home champion.
I have never seen a team move this well, Jill. They've got their eye on the ball, and they are making their goals.
Download Grammarly for free.
And authenticity, or genuineness. So those are the three. So I'm going to go in a different order, and I'm going to first talk about authenticity or genuineness. Being real. You gotta be real. So, who has the responsibility of being real in the treatment room? Everybody. The clients have to be real. They have to be honest with what they're experiencing. And so does the therapist. Now, I say with people who I can see are not being genuine or authentic, say, look, you're as sick as your secrets. We could spend a lot of time dancing around the issue, but is that serving you well? So being real. Now, what's nice about being authentic is that the clinician can also express their experience. So in a group therapy setting, it might not be uncommon for a group leader to say to someone who's habitually late, I feel somewhat disrespected by the fact that you're not coming on time, right? So you would be like, whoa, who gave the therapist the authority to share their emotions like that? The model does. So that's one, genuineness. Two is unconditional positive regard. Unconditional positive regard is a sense that I have to love you for who you are, as you are, with no strings attached. So I am not trying to control you. I'm not trying to mirror the world. I just love you as you are. I'm going to facilitate growth with you. I'm going to help you with self-exploration, but I'm going to accept you as you are. Now, what's interesting, according to Rogers, is that many of the problems that people experience in life is due to conditions of worth. We receive either explicit or implicit messages that we're unlovable unless we behave a certain way. And I'll give you an example. All you have to do is go to a Little League baseball game. And if you go to a Little League baseball game, you will see there are two kinds of parents at the baseball game. There's that one parent who's screaming at their kid, hit the ball, hit the ball. Well, what happens when a kid strikes out? That kid feels as if they're not loved because they didn't hit the ball. Whereas there's another kind of parent at Little League who's cheering you on, and if you strike out, that's okay, we'll get them next time. That is unconditional love, unconditional positive regard. The kid who strikes out and the parent loves them no less, and the kid hears that, that's unconditional positive regard. And in therapy, we have to express unconditional positive regard and sometimes reparent our clients and give them the love they never got. And, I have to tell you that because I'm an independent practice, I don't take on clients that I can't learn to love. Because I have to care about them more than just as a 45-minute interval. I have to be happy with their successes and, struggle with their struggles. All of that is healthy. That's normal from a humanistic or a person-centered approach. And then last but not least is empathy. You have to be able to put yourself in their shoes and imagine what it must be like to be them. That, if you do these three things, you're going to bond with your clients. So the goal is to be a fully functioning, fully experiencing person. Learn to accept yourself. You decide how you change. One of the nice things about Rogerian therapy or person-centered therapy is who's the leader? Person-centered. I may be an expert in psychology, but I'm not an expert on you. So I follow your lead. So a person-centered approach allows the group members to guide the show. Now, we create safety, trust, self-exploration. We help identify areas that block growth. I already talked to you about the genuineness, warmth, empathy, unconditional acceptance. All of these are aspects of client-centered or person-centered therapy. Now, when you do person-centered therapy in a group process, it's very important to understand that you are not what caused the change. You are an instrument of change. You are a facilitator of change. But it was the group that made that happen. So the focus is more on the relationship with the group rather than a specific technique. Now, there is something called person-centered expressive arts therapy, which uses arts in group to engage in healing and self-discovery. Now let's move to Gestalt. So Gestalt is an approach that focuses on here and now, what you're experiencing, any unfinished business you have, and there is an emphasis on choice and responsibility. Now, the originators of Gestalt therapy were Fritz Perls and his wife.
The only bag that folds over and stays open. Ziploc, unlock life.
So they developed this model. So there's a focus on the therapist's presence, being authentic, as we said, gentleness, self-expression as a therapist, and building a sense of trust. Now, one technique that's not talked about from a Gestalt point of view is a skillful frustration. And that's interesting, right? So skillful frustration is sometimes you're going to intentionally not give the client what they want to foster a greater sense of growth. For example, if you have a person who has an issue with boundaries and they come early to session, you might intentionally not take them until their scheduled time as a sense of teaching. We start at a certain time, we end at a certain time, to teach a sense of boundaries and containment. Now that might frustrate them, but it's done with a purpose. Now, leaders from a Gestalt point of view focus on tinkering or experimenting with things, trying to explore rather than a direct intervention. We do pay attention to feelings, thought, body, sensations, and actions as pathways to understand what's going on. From a Gestalt point of view, you might ask the person, what are you feeling right now? And then you might ask them, well, where in your body are you carrying that? So those somatic experiences tell a story, especially with trauma. Somatic experience and trauma is incredibly important to talk about that. Now, psychodrama, I referenced this in a previous lecture as well, but now members are exploring decision-making through role-playing, enacting situations, and you might have the protagonist, the antagonist, and the audience, and each are offering feedback to the individuals after the experience. You might act out past experience, present experience, or anticipating life experiences to help you cope or plan what you want to do. But role-playing the past, because most group therapies are present to future focused. When you role-play the past, there's a purpose for it. And the purpose is to try and assign a new meaning or a new perspective on your past so that you can get a release or a catharsis. Now, psychodrama also fosters creativity within the individual, creates a sense of group and community, and builds a culture. Now, if you use a psychodramatic method, you're going to have a more active role or a director role. So the group leader is the director. So as I said, think about this as you have a protagonist who's the lead figure in the play or the movie. You have an antagonist, whoever is the source of conflict. You have the audience, and then you have the director giving guidance on how to act things out. Now, so that's psychodrama. Let's shift gears to cognitive behavioral approach. And it's important for me to impress upon you that cognitive behavioral therapy, similar to psychoanalytic perspectives, has many different branches. So if you were to think about psychoanalytic perspective, you had classic Freudian therapy, and then you had ego psychologists, you had object relation psychologists and whatnot. Well, when we talk about what is cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm going to encourage you to refer to it as cognitive behavioral therapies with an S on it, plural. Now, I'm going to define it, then I'm going to take you on a history lesson with it. Cognitive behavioral therapy focuses on how your thoughts drive your behaviors. Thoughts impact your actions. So if I can reorganize your thoughts, if I can modify your thoughts, then your behavior will change as a function of that. Now, there's classic cognitive therapy, which just focuses on thoughts and thought work. There's classic behavioral therapy, which just focuses on do this, do that, reinforcement, punishment. Then there's first wave cognitive behavioral therapy when we talk about Meichenbaum and Aaron Beck these individuals, which are classic cognitive behavioral therapy, which puts them together. Then you have Albert Ellis, which is REBT, rational emotive behavioral therapy. Rational emotive behavioral therapy is considered a second wave cognitive behavioral therapy. And one of the things that's interesting is that Albert Ellis adds more of the emotions into the mix. So your actions aren't just driven by your thoughts, but they can be driven by emotions as well. And in fact, emotions can color your thoughts as well. And then there's something called third wave cognitive behavioral therapies. These are a lot of the mindfulness-based therapies. So if you've heard of dialectical behavioral therapy or acceptance and commitment therapy, many of these are considered third wave cognitive behavioral therapies. They're still in the cognitive behavioral family, but they're part of it. So now that I've given you a very quick rundown, I'm going to go into each of them. So behavioral therapy, the cornerstone of this approach is to identify specific goals at the onset of therapy and to monitor and measure progress. There is a comprehensive assessment of each individual, and then there's a series of empirically supported techniques that are used to accomplish these goals. Now, it's important for me to say this because many authors of textbooks refer to evidence-based therapy or empirically supported techniques. Of the other approaches, they're also empirically supported. So I know that evidence-based therapy has been used as a sword to attack psychoanalytic models. But if you look at work of Jonathan Shedler, they're also evidence-based or empirically supported treatments as well. So, but nevertheless, this is where it comes up in the lecture, so I'm bringing it up. All right, so behavioral therapy. So the members and the therapist collectively establish treatment goals that are concrete, measurable, and objective. You may have heard of the term SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-sensitive. SMART goals. So that comes from a behavioral approach. Leaders tend to be more active and directive. They tend to be more problem-solving, saying do this, do that. From a behavioral point of view, some techniques include relaxation, exercises, behavioral rehearsals, coaching, guided practice, cognitive restructuring, and systematic desensitization. Now, cognitive therapy focuses on automatic thoughts, which are knee-jerk interpretations, and cognitive restructuring, which is trying to reorganize your thoughts. So at the basis of CBT is an understanding is that we all can get things wrong. We can all draw incorrect conclusions. And sometimes we do have a tendency to have false or self-defeating thoughts that interfere with us reaching our potential. And I'll give you an example. So if you're in a group setting and a person says, you know, I'm a failure, it could be useful to be like, well, what evidence do you have that you're a failure? And then say, well, I'd like to offer some counter evidence. I don't see you the same way. And then maybe in a group setting, say, how about other people? Do you see person X this way? So you can challenge these self-defeating thoughts and attempt to develop healthier thoughts. Group leaders include or combine empathy and sensitivity with their techniques to build that relationship. They're present-centered, more psychoeducational. They tend to be more time-limited, whereas psychoanalytic tends to be more long-term. And there is a use in teaching behavioral skills as well as Socratic reasoning. So asking questions to help people think about what they are thinking is useful. Now, I already talked to you about REBT, rational emotive behavioral therapy. This is Albert Ellis. So we have self-defeating thoughts, which results in these emotional disturbances, or vice versa, and behavioral disorders. So correcting the dysfunctional belief from external sources is useful. Now, so REBT practitioners unconditionally accept their members of their group, and they teach them to unconditionally accept one another. That's very similar to person-centered therapy. And then REBT used a whole host of different techniques and models. So choice theories. Choice theory, this is more William Glasser, reality therapy. So choice theory is the underlying philosophy of reality therapy. So we all have responsibility and choice. No matter how tough things are, we still have a choice in the matter. So, and everyone is motivated for change. So you're going to change when you realize a current behavior doesn't get you what you want, or you're going to change your behavior when you realize other behaviors might get you closer to what you want. So when we talk about reality therapy, the goal is to help people find better ways to meet their need for survival, love, belonging, power, freedom, and fun. So all of these basic needs people have. So there is an involvement with and concern for all the group members that's demonstrated by the group leader throughout the whole group. And you have the counseling environment, and then the procedures that lead to change. So you might have heard of WDEP. So you evaluate, what do you want? What are you doing? So it all starts with what a person wants. And then you ask them, well, what are you doing? And then you evaluate that. Is what you're doing getting you closer to accomplishing the goal or not? So E stands for evaluation, and P stands for plan. So if you evaluate what you're doing and it's not getting you what you want, and it's not getting you closer, can we work together to come up with a plan that will get you what you need? All right, so that's your cognitive behavioral therapies. Now, we also have postmodern approaches such as solution-focused brief therapy, or SFBT. So the goal is to accomplish things in a very short time. The shortest group therapy that I've done was 6 sessions. But typically it's anywhere between 12 to 15 sessions. And instead of talking about problems, we want to talk about creating solutions. So it's very solution oriented. And you quickly have to shift away from the problem to a solution. Okay, what are you doing about it? What are your goals? What do you want? How do you want to change things? So you're always forcing the change or the focus on the solution rather than the problem. Solution-focused therapy tends to be collaborative in nature, so the group and the group leader work together. It's very important to keep people on the solution track rather than a problem track. So you're going to shift focus. So if they revert back to the problem, you say, okay, let's put us back on track. Well, can anyone offer a suggestion or solution to address this problem? Now, so techniques used in solution-focused brief therapy, as well as other techniques, include questions about pre-therapy change. That question sounds like this. Have you done anything to address the problem between scheduling the appointment and being here today? So now you're already focusing on, hey, I could be doing something either before session or between sessions. Exception problems. Tell me what it was like before the problem emerged, and trying to draw attention to before this was an issue, how did you live your life? Miracle question. This question sounds like this. If I had a magic wand and I waved it over you and everything went the way you wanted in therapy, what would it look like? What would be changed about you? Scaling questions. So this is used a lot in motivational interviewing. So if you ask a person, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's the likelihood you're going to apply for a job? And they might say 7. Oh, 7, that's really good. You know, why not a 6? So the scaling is you take their number, you ask them why not a 6 to help them think about how far along they are, and then you ask them, which is the cool part of it, what would it take you to get to an 8? So you're looking on both sides of the number and trying to guide them. You give them homework, you give them feedback. Now, narrative therapy, this occurs in journaling or storytelling. You might ask people to write a story about their life and try and make meaning of it. And each person is invited to view their story through different perspectives and co-create an alternative life story. Now, this is a cool thing. You could write the story of your life, and then I'll tell you, well, the story's not over. Write any ending to this story you want. You could write a more positive end. So narrative therapy works that way. So there is an emphasis on how societal standards were internalized and how they affected their experience. And from a narrative therapy's point of view, it could be captured by the person is not the problem is the problem. So we separate the person from the problem or the behaviors as the experience. Now the therapist takes a position of curiosity or not knowing, inquisitiveness. So instead of being clear, you know, that's interesting. Have you thought about this? Right? So it's very tentative. Now, motivational interviewing, this comes from Miller. Miller talked about how to guide people in growth. Now, this is an outgrowth of person-centered therapy, but it's very directive. And that's the biggest difference. Person-centered therapy is a non-directive therapy, whereas motivational interviewing is directive, but still the client becomes the frame of reference. Now, the best analogy that's given by Miller and colleagues from motivational interviewing is that it's sort of like training a horse. If you want to train a horse to do things, you got to gently guide it. Be gentle in your correction. Keep moving it towards its goal, right? Slowly and with compassion. Well, motivational interviewing does the same thing. They gently provide you guidance to help you move towards your goal or exhibit positive change. We help people shift from ambivalence to an intrinsic motivation, making their own decisions. Now, practitioners who use the motivational spirit tend to establish collaborative partnerships with the members of the group. And what they do is they emphasize the team aspect and they draw ideas from the group. The group is a source of resources rather than the group leader being the.
Hey guys, I want to cover motivational interviewing on Wednesday, so I'll check back in with you on that Wednesday.